All right, we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Vervoe webinar, the fourth in our series on the skills shortage. We started with the candidate experience, then we did employer branding, then we did screening in, not out, and today we're talking about employee onboarding. It's 8 a.m. here in Paradise, it's 6 p.m. in New York, 3 on the West Coast, and as usual, it's time for bed if you're in Europe. Today, we have our expert panelist is Anthony Enright from Klarna. I'll tell you a bit about Klarna and Anthony's role, and we'll get straight into it. So Klarna is a Swedish company that creates the ultimate shopping experience for people, where you can be inspired by shopping content and media, purchase things through the app, and you can use Klarna's alternative finance options to pay for things. Now, Anthony's got a really interesting role. He's responsible for supporting Klarna's growth in the APAC region, and that includes the people function, but also Anthony spins up new businesses. So he's responsible for Klarna's entry into new markets, which gives him unique insight into the growth of the company and growth of people generally. And we're going to talk about employee onboarding today and what that looks like for a company that's growing and in this kind of bizarre world that we live in today. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody who's rocked up. I'm looking forward to sharing a few things that I've learned over the years and maybe even learning a few things from you guys. So thanks.
Great. Let's get straight into it. So first of all, onboarding. What is it? When does it start? When does it end, if ever?
If ever, maybe not. But well, the first thing I'd say is onboarding it's the way that the company builds a relationship and connection with a new hire. Now, that actually starts from, in my view, once they've signed the contract and made that conscious decision to join that company. It's also a way that you can develop a sense of belonging for that individual and also help them understand the world that they're about to step into. So like I said, in my view, it starts from once they've signed the contract. Some others would argue that it starts even earlier than that, and others might argue that it starts later. The way that I view that, though, is that if you think about the situation that the candidate or the new hire is in at the time that they've signed the contract, it's a very exciting moment for them. And in the context of why wouldn't it start once they've signed that contract? Because if you don't, then it means that they could have a period of time during their notice period where you miss the opportunity to start building that relationship and trust. And if you also think about people at that stage, they've got other offers on the table. Their company might be trying to counter offer them. And so for me, it's the logical time to start.
Okay, so we'll come back to the second half of that question of when does it end, but let's start with, let's pick up on the comment you made around it starts from the contract. So I've signed a contract, I'm a candidate. What should I expect? What is, typically you sign a contract and then maybe nothing happens until, your first day or maybe a day before that. I assume that's not amazing onboarding. So what does great onboarding look like from when I've signed that contract?
Yeah, there's a couple of elements. One is that how do you make a logical flow of information so that a person can start to learn about your company even before they start? You might have career pages, you might have landing pages, you might have content that is relevant for people before they start. And so as a new person joining after they've signed the contract, there's a logical drip feed of information that they can receive. The other aspect is that, in my view, and this is something that we do at both Klarna and I did at my previous company at Serata, was if you have a goal to not have a new person on their first day sat in a room by themselves signing paperwork, and there's some really logical things that you can do so that you can start the paperwork process. And that's much easier to do for somebody if they're on a Sunday afternoon just hanging out and got a little bit of time on their hands. They can fill out their payroll information. They can fill out their superannuation information. They can fill out or start reading some of the policies or guidelines that your company has. And again, in the context of what kind of experience do you want to create for that person on their first day. So there's some of the things that you can do. The other aspects, though, are you can create memorable experiences for people. Actually, one example that I've seen done really well is a manager picked up through the interview process that somebody was very interested in reading, and they made a book recommendation. That manager then, after they signed the contract, a couple of weeks later, sent them that book with a little handwritten note that said, "Hey, I hope you enjoy a little bit of relaxation time while you're relaxing before you join."
So that's picking up on something from the interview, from the selection process, and then bringing that to life, which shows that you've listened and you care, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. In the context of what I said before, you're building a relationship and trust with that person, and what better way to do that than demonstrate that you've heard them as a person.
What about, okay, so putting aside the sort of process stuff and the administrative stuff, what about immersing the new employee in the company's mission or culture, and also second part of that question is, what about sort of setting them up for success, helping them be sort of more job ready on day one, or is that really sort of eating into their vacation time? Is that unful? Where are the boundaries here?
Yeah, so there's examples of companies that pay people a lot of money to take a vacation during their in-between stage. So there's that view of the world where actually go away and don't think about anything, because on day one and through your onboarding, we've got a robust enough program that you don't have to think about that before you join.
And presumably detoxing from your previous company and just having this kind of mental break is a good thing.
It could be a great thing. And I would say this is where it comes down to the topic of personalization and actually listening to somebody during that process, is that you've got people who won't want a bar of anything because they'll be either stressed, anxious, they've got a lot of work to do as part of a handover. And the last thing that they want to do is get stuck into a whole lot of content that you potentially have lined up for somebody. If it's the cookie cutter, here's what we give new people before they actually start.
Or they're clubbing in Ibiza in between jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And if they're like reading about values of the new company before they start, and they're doing other things, they may not resonate with them. So I think that's where I've got a strong view of take the lead from the candidate and the person, is that you will as a company have a suite of information and documents and things that you could give to a new person before they start. That'll either live in a LMS or in your Google suite, the G Suite. But the reality is, you can ask the question of how much involvement do you want to have in the business before you start. Another quick example.
It's not cookie cutter. It's okay to ask the new employee, the new hire, what they had in mind, and depending on whether they want to switch off or sort of read up and prepare, it doesn't have to be the same onboarding for everyone. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
exactly. People I've onboarded ask the question, and some people want all of the strategy information, they want the org chart so that they can see who's who, so they can start stalking on LinkedIn. They want to see results of the business. They want to see what the upcoming 6 months looks like, so that they can that helps some people prepare for their first day and get in the right headspace to be successful. And why wouldn't you want to do that with people? Other people would prefer to go to Ibiza, hang out by the beach, and read a personal book of their choice. And I think that having the expectation that people need to know a certain amount before their start date is a bit of a risky one. It's not impossible, but it's just a little bit risky.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I feel more relaxed now, that knowing that it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. So presumably, you touched on this kind of moment, and I remember this moment, it feels like a lifetime ago, but previous points in my career when you're sitting in the room and you sign the contract and there's someone sitting there with you from the company and you shake hands and all this kind of stuff. Today, that happens a lot less, because, we live in a world where things are happening more remotely. That was happening already, but now with the pandemic, obviously, there's a lot less of that. So how has the whole kind of remote working from home, hiring people in different geographies, which I know you personally do, how has that impacted onboarding? And net, is it more challenging, or are there also some benefits in sort of doing things in that world?
Yeah. In my head, two things come to mind. One is that there's going to be some basic principles that apply to anybody, whether you're hiring them remotely or not. The basic principles are you need to get them equipment. You need to figure out how to get them involved in your social engagements. You need to figure out how to get people content, because there's a content element to all onboarding. And there's also an element of how to get people socially interacting and getting involved in your company's cultural norms or standard, like the things that you do. So all of those things and again, when it comes down to building trust and relationship with that person, when it comes to imparting knowledge, those still apply just as much. The reality is how you do them is going to be different. And that's where if you don't have the technology to help you do that, it's going to be difficult. It doesn't need to be really fancy technology. It can be as simple as email setup. It can be as simple as for example, you want to give somebody a lens of what their first couple of days is going to be before they start. You can do that in a fancy LMS system, or you can do it in an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
The end result is that the person is going to understand that the company has given some thought to what their first day is going to be, and that's going to give somebody a sense of, yes, I feel good about that, and I feel like they care enough about me, where they're trying to set me up for success. And so those things are going to be different. The social engagement is the most tricky, I would say, because putting aside the fact that you're going to send a laptop to somebody before their first day, you might send some branded merch to them before their first day so that they can get a different lens or a spin of connecting with the company. You might send them, actually, this is another example, a GIF of the team doing some crazy fun things because they want to just create a little bit of fun during the pre-boarding stage. Is that those things will just happen by technology and by logistics. The social element is difficult because you need to figure out a way of getting them included in virtual team gatherings, virtual team meetings. Sometimes, and actually this worked really well at Ansarada, we would invite people physically to the office on the Friday afternoon, all hands and celebrations before their start date. How do you replicate that in a virtual world? Well, you can send them a link and give them the option to come along if they want. But then how do you think about how you introduce them to the team, because you've got this random person on the call?
And particularly when someone is entering the company as a remote employee, but with existing employees who did not enter as remote employees, they've worked together in an office and then maybe moved to working from home, but they've already got that chemistry through sitting next to each other. And now someone's coming in not really on kind of on equal footing in that respect. That could be daunting.
I would feel daunted by that. And who's looking after that, and who's getting the level so that people who are joining after the fact, and when people have spent a bit of time together personally and built up that trust and relationship, is that I would see that as both the manager and team's responsibility, because belonging happens at a team level just as much as company. But then as like from a HR lens, which is the one that I take usually, is, well, what little triggers and alerts can you set up for managers and people so that if they've got a new hire, how do you scale that? Well, if a manager gets a prompt to say, you've got this new hire starting in 4 weeks' time, you've got this series of events that you could potentially bring that person along to. You could trigger those notifications to go out so that you can say, put a call in, just see how they're doing. No reason other than to build trust. What social events have you got as a team, and how can you be mindful of that? And another thing that happens in the lead up to the first days, but also the first day at Klarna, is that you've got Slack and there's a big group channel, and the manager introduces the new person and just gives a quick little spiel and celebrates the fact that somebody's joining. And just little moments like those a collection of them can actually lead to somebody feeling engaged.
You touched on triggers, notifications, reminding the manager to call. Sort of made me think of an interesting question. Who's responsible for onboarding? Is it HR? Is it the manager? Is it so where, we've signed the contract. Now who's responsible to own the onboarding?
Yeah, there's company onboarding, and that's just owned and managed by HR. And it's not all of the content for it, and its delivery isn't completely owned by HR, but the actual onboarding as a product typically is. And I would say that it's well placed in that team because it cuts across the whole business, and onboarding isn't just a slither of information about a particular department. It's a collection of information and knowledge from a whole load of different areas of the business and brought into a logical learning experience for the person. So at Klarna, that's done in a 2-day Klarna check-in forum, and org development owns that, organ leadership. And what that means is that Klarna check-ins are a combination of sessions from products, security, compliance, organ lead. You've got some customer aspects in there, and all of those are delivered by different people, and they're delivered on a monthly basis. The flip side to that, because that's company onboarding,
right?
Functional and team-based onboarding.
So what does the manager own?
The manager owns, and the team that person is joining owns the functional onboarding from end to end. And while HR can apply or help those teams apply some basic learning fundamentals so that they can come up with a plan that's robust and scalable enough, and captures how humans learn, is that you can get those principles, but at the end of the day, the experts, the knowledge experts, need to own and run that program from the content all the way through to the specific milestones within that onboarding, through to the way that it's actually delivered and who's delivering it. Is that experts in their fields, whether it's engineering or sales and customer service, they're the ones that end up delivering that. Okay,
so I'm a manager of a sales team and I've got a new sales rep. How do I know they're onboarded? When does it end? When do I consider that I'm no longer doing onboarding? Is there such a thing? Is there a moment?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think that it comes down to the manager and the team's view of what does ramped up look like. And there's going to be milestones that teams have and things that a new salesperson in that example will be doing or achieving that demonstrate to the team and the manager that this person has learned what they need to learn to be able to do the fundamentals of the job. And so that might be, for a salesperson, achieving a certain amount of sales or new customers across the line. For an engineer, it might be a little bit different. It might look like somebody's delivered a piece of code or put it into production, and that demonstrates that they can build it, learn the problem, solve it with team members, and then put it into production. That would demonstrate to people that they've ramped up.
Okay, so as a manager, I need to have a sense of what that is. Otherwise, if I don't know what I'm aiming for, it's going to be pretty hard to get there, right? So presumably, as a manager, I need to have this definition of, I consider a person to be sort of up and running when X has happened, and I need to work towards that. And if they're not getting to that point, presumably something needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly. In Klarna world, that looks like we've got a thing called the game plan.
Game plan.
And the manager works very specifically with the individual. They've got intervals of 2 weeks, 2 months, 4 months. And at each of those intervals, there's competences that person is expected to be able to achieve on. And they have conversations and lead up to those milestone conversations that what does great look like for myself? That's solving the right problem or communicating. And so from that perspective, I have that discussion with my manager. They help align with what I'm expected to achieve. And then on each of those intervals, I also go out and seek feedback from my peers and the people that I'm impacting, so that can also be a demonstrator of whether I'm achieving that. At Enright, it looks a bit different because we had, especially in the sales environment, specific sales milestones that people would have. And so that was a little bit clearer and you're either hitting them or you weren't, that demonstrated that you were doing the job. And so that'll vary by the different team and department, which is why I differentiate between company onboarding and functional onboarding so much.
So, okay, that raises another question, and then after that, I might start taking weaving in questions from the audience. So just digging deeper on the role of the manager, is it possible that if a new employee is not working out, is it possible that onboarding has played a role in that? So what I'm really asking is, maybe you're 6 months in, everyone, you realize this isn't working well. The logical conclusion, I think, for most companies is, oh, we made a bad hire. Okay. But is it possible that actually we made the right hire, but we didn't set them up for success for whatever reason? I mean, an obvious reason would be, well, they would have done great in the office, but the transition to remote working was hard. It could be a million reasons, but we didn't set them up for success, didn't support them, maybe the onboarding wasn't great, and they never really got to that stage of up and running to be able to even judge performance. Is that possible? Or am I reaching here for something? Is it actually just a bad hire?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, onboarding the thing that helps? Actually, let me rephrase or let me rethink. Is onboarding an amplification of that person's behaviors and skill sets that you've assessed during the interview process, that's led you to hire them in the first place? Or is onboarding the thing that's needed for that person to develop those things during their first 3-6 months? And the way that I think of it is that onboarding is actually it's the amplification of a person, of the right hire that you've made through a robust and thorough interview process, which means that onboarding absolutely plays a role in somebody's success or failure. But what it comes down to in my head is that how much of a role? I don't think that it has as much of a role in somebody failing. I think it has more of a opportunistic lens of it, of how quickly could you ramp somebody up?
Right, that's what I was thinking as you were talking. So I can get a sales rep ramped quicker.
Yeah.
Or I can get someone sort of fully immersed in the operating rhythm of the company quicker. They'll be productive quicker.
Yeah, that's right. And they'll have relationships built quicker, and they'll build trust quicker with their colleagues, and they'll develop a connection with the company quicker, so that they'll be even more motivated to succeed. And so that's generally the lens that I take with it. If you're getting to the end of somebody's probation period and you're still not confident that they're going to be successful, in my head, most of the time, that's going to be down to, yes, the onboarding might have sucked in the first couple of weeks or first couple of months, but by 4, 5 months, 6 months, hopefully they've picked up on the things that they needed regardless, if they've demonstrated the right behaviors and if they have the right skill set.
So what you're saying is the onboarding is not necessarily going to determine whether they're the right hire or not, or whether they're successful or not, but it'll accelerate or hinder. But eventually the right person will get there, and the wrong person, that'll be flushed out anyway. Okay, that's a great answer. You touched on, building trust with colleagues quicker. There's another point around that, which is earlier in the conversation, you talked about like virtual events. And I've been meaning to come back to that. And this is a great segue. So one of the things missing in the sort of world of distributed or remote working is the fleeting interactions, the water cooler, the sort of, I bump into someone, or, hey, you just wander over to someone's desk, all that kind of stuff. And it's harder to manufacture that in a world where like we're all working from home and you've got to say to someone, hey, you free, and all that kind of stuff over Slack. And you and I chatted earlier that we joked before the webinar that I've tried to do that a few times and said to people, hey, you free in half an hour? And they always think they're getting fired. So now I just try and avoid that because people freak out. Is it possible? I mean, do we have to give up on fleeting interactions and just work in a more structured way? Or is it possible to actually recreate some of that spontaneity that I think a lot of us miss, to be honest?
Yeah, I've been given some thought to it as well. Throwing I'm not firing you in the headline, for an invitation like that might. And no, I cop similar kind of sentiment, by the way. But so I think that there's a couple of things. One is, and this goes back to my comment before about the manager who sent the book out to their new hire before they started, is that I'm also a believer that HR or the company doesn't have to manufacture everything, and that if you've hired the right people and given some guidance and some structure, or even just some just some guidance, not even structure, of, hey, like we work in this remote setting, some really important and effective fleeting conversation is going to be missed now. But if you've got team members in your team that, it's like, if you've got a spare 5-10 minutes, go and set something up randomly with somebody. And that doesn't have to come from the company. It can just as easily come from people. So in my head, it comes down to a culture that you create. And I think that from a company point of view, one of the things that we will have to start thinking about is, how do you create social engagement in a non-formal setting? And what are the things that you put in the background for it so that you can enable it? Do you give everybody $10 per month, and it's a coffee cart for somebody to go down to their local cafe and use that time to call a friend at work just randomly, and they can have that kind of interaction that they would have had by the kitchen? Simple thing. It enables people. It could be scalable, but it gives people permission to go and do that as well. And we might be living in a world at the moment, while we're trying to learn these things, about what do we have permission to do and not, and what's going to disrupt somebody's day versus what's going to create a bit of fun and excitement, and that's going to add more value than disrupting them for about 5 minutes. So anyway, they're just a few thoughts.
I mean, the two things that you said that I really liked. One is it can happen organically. The company doesn't have to prescribe everything. And I think a lot of people probably feel that they don't want the company to prescribe everything. And the second is to give people permission, which I think is a great point. The role of HR or managers or whoever in the company is not always to prescribe. It's to give permission and say, and then the team will do the rest. So just sort of before we wrap up, there've been a bunch of questions from the audience around collateral, and you touched on it in the beginning. You talked about the book, which resonated with me. Can you give other examples of tangible content or collateral during the onboarding phase, and keen to move beyond the obvious like payroll, tax? Yeah, that's a given. Got to do that stuff. But something interesting. What's something that you've seen that's been amazing onboarding, where people have just wow, they've been surprised, they've been delighted?
There was, so Enright does Christmas parties. Well, I was there for 6 years, and so the Christmas parties were a weekend away in various locations around the world. And there were a couple of people that started a couple of weeks or a month, hadn't started, and they were in the lead up to starting on the 1st of January, 5th of January. But they were brought to that 2-day retreat Christmas party anyway. And I think you could look at that through two different lenses. One is, that's a big investment in somebody before they've even started, but and what if they don't join? What if they don't work out? But then the other aspect is that, have you just shortened the social awkwardness from the couple of months or month or so to 1 day, and before they even start, they're already hitting the ground running with the kind of conversations they're able to have with people. So that's they're just something to think about from a social point of view. The other is there's a couple of, Klarna's got some really good video footage and actual presentation content around the leadership principles. It's got activities that people can do around that, so that you can start to dig deeper into what a leadership principle is and what it means to you and what it means to your role. There's no reason, if people have already been thinking about that through the interview process, there's no reason why you can't take that to another level and think, okay, well, how can you, now that you are joining Klarna, how can you do that activity in the context of what will great look like for that leadership principle if you're to lead, if you're to live it out. So there are a couple of content, tangible things. You can give people activities, again, in the context of how open are you? Or do you feel like just taking it easy for a couple of weeks? And then the other one that my old manager did for me was send me the org chart, and took me for a coffee. And maybe in this world, it's a virtual coffee, and gave me the book of the quarter. And that book of the quarter was a big influential factor in the way that the company was focused on themes and quarterly activities. And so that set me up for the future quarter really nicely. And it was a bit of light reading, but I also took it away personally and thought, actually, I like reading this stuff anyway. So,
and the great thing about that is, I think when people start, they get caught up in the sort of pretty quickly in execution and the day-to-day, and you often don't go back to the leadership and the values and all those kind of things. So that probably that pre-starting, or maybe that first week, is that period where the receptors are open to digesting that stuff. Cool. Well, yeah. I think we're over time, so we'll wrap. I like to do a summary. The key things for me that I took out of today were tailoring. So it doesn't have to be the same onboarding for everybody. It can be tailored to the individual, which I think is a great point. The onboarding is not necessarily going to directly contribute to the failure of an employee, but it might amplify or highlight some issues, and potentially is an opportunity to accelerate. So that's another great point. And the third thing was around the sort of role that talent versus managers have, and giving people permission, and not necessarily being highly prescriptive. They're the things that I've taken away. Have I missed anything? Anything you want to add?
No. Other than this was a lot of fun. I think that, like I said in the lead up to this call, that topic about whether onboarding and how the magnitude of role that onboarding plays in somebody's success or failure is a really interesting one for me. And I haven't given it a whole lot of thought until the lead up to this call. So for me, I'll definitely give that one some more thought and reflect on that. But that's my view at the moment. And so yeah.
Good. Well, that's the point of this, to make people think, including ourselves. And I've learned a lot from you. And Anthony, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us. And thanks to everyone who's dialed in today. And we're continuing with the next. We've extended this series now because there's been a lot of demand. So I think we're doing one a week now. So stay tuned and subscribe to get the updates on the next webinars. And thanks again to everyone. And Anthony, thanks to you.
Thanks for having me. All the best.
Thanks everyone.